The freezing wind was so brutal that my newborn daughter started crying the second the front door slammed behind me. I stood on an icy driveway with two babies only 10 days old pressed tightly against my chest while snow settled on their tiny blankets. My husband never called my name, he never ran after us. Instead, he watched from inside the warm house as his mother threw us away like we had never belonged there at all. What neither of them understood was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Harper Bennett, and until that night I believed my marriage had simply lost its way. Looking back now, I realize it had been falling apart for much longer than I wanted to admit. 10 days earlier I had delivered beautiful twins after nearly 12 exhausting hours in labor. While I struggled through every contraction, my husband, Mason Carter, spent more time staring at his phone than looking at me. I counted every time the screen lit up because focusing on those numbers distracted me from the pain. 41 times. Every notification reminded me that the man I trusted most seemed to be somewhere else even while standing beside my hospital bed. When our son Noah and daughter Lily finally arrived, I convinced myself everything would improve. Mason cried while holding them for the first time, and I let that moment erase months of worrying. Pregnancy had changed him. He became distant, worked late almost every night, and stopped sharing the little moments that once made us feel like partners. I blame stress, responsibility, and the fear that many first-time fathers experience. It never crossed my mind that something much darker was happening behind my back. 3 years before any of this happened, I met Mason during a charity fundraiser in downtown Chicago. At the time I introduced myself as an interior designer with a growing business. That was true, but it was only a small part of the truth. I had founded one of the most respected luxury design firms in the region, although very few people knew my real identity. Most of my professional work was published under the business name instead of my own. I preferred privacy because growing up poor had taught me that money often attracted the wrong kind of attention. I wanted people to value me for my character instead of my bank account. Mason assumed I earned an average living, and I never corrected him. I honestly enjoyed being treated like an ordinary woman instead of someone who managed a successful company. My mother spent years cleaning office buildings after my father disappeared from our lives, and I remembered how relatives looked down on her because she wore inexpensive clothes and counted every dollar. Those memories stayed with me long after my own circumstances changed. I promised myself I would never judge another person by what they owned, and I hoped the man I married would feel the same. Unfortunately, Mason's mother, Evelyn Carter, judged everyone by appearances. From the first family dinner she made it painfully clear that I would never meet her standards. She smiled while delivering insults that sounded polite enough for everyone else to ignore. She often joked that Mason had chosen love instead of money, believing I had very little of either. Every comment stung, but I stayed quiet because I loved my husband and wanted peace more than pride. I believed kindness would eventually win her over. Instead, my silence convinced her that I was weak. When Mason and I bought our home together, I quietly paid most of the down payment using money from my investment accounts. I never announced it because I saw no reason to turn marriage into a financial competition. The paperwork clearly documented every transfer, yet Mason never asked where the money came from. He simply accepted that somehow we always managed to afford everything we needed. That lack of curiosity should have worried me, but I mistook it for trust. The pregnancy became increasingly difficult as the months passed. Carrying twins drained every bit of my energy, yet I continued running my company from a bright sunroom office inside our house. Mason gradually became more distant. He stopped talking about baby names, stopped touching my growing stomach, and always seemed distracted whenever I tried discussing our future. Every excuse sounded reasonable on its own, but together they painted a picture I refused to see. There was also a woman from his office named Vanessa. I met her twice during company events, and both times Mason introduced her so casually that it almost sounded rehearsed. She laughed a little too easily at everything he said and somehow always managed to stand beside him. I noticed the chemistry but dismissed it as friendship. I trusted my husband, and trust has a strange way of convincing people to ignore the warning signs sitting directly in front of them. The babies arrived during a heavy winter storm that covered the city in thick snow. Those first few days were a blur of sleepless nights, bottles, diapers, and overwhelming love. Even with the exhaustion, I felt grateful every time I looked at Noah and Lily sleeping peacefully beside each other. I believed our family simply needed time to settle into a new routine. Instead, The atmosphere inside our home became colder with each passing day. Evelyn started visiting every afternoon, claiming she wanted to help with the twins. Most of her visits ended with quiet conversations in the kitchen between her and Mason that stopped the moment I entered the room. I told myself they were planning ways to support us, never imagining they were actually planning how to remove me from the family altogether. On the 9th night after giving birth, I picked up our family tablet to add diapers to the grocery list. Instead, a message appeared on the screen because one of Mason's accounts had automatically synchronized across devices. It was only a single sentence from Vanessa, but it changed everything. She wrote that once I was gone they could finally stop pretending. My hands went numb as I read those words over and over. My exhausted mind immediately assumed they were talking about divorce, but deep inside I felt there was something even worse waiting for me. The following morning I asked Mason the simplest question imaginable. I wanted to know whether he was involved with Vanessa. Instead of denying it, he looked almost relieved that I had finally discovered the truth. He calmly admitted they had been seeing each other for nearly a year. He said our marriage had already ended in his heart and insisted it would be easier if everyone accepted reality before life became even more complicated. Sitting there with our newborn son sleeping in my arms, I could barely understand how a father could speak so casually about abandoning the family we had just created. That evening Evelyn arrived carrying containers of homemade soup, smiling as though nothing had happened. Once the baby settled down, she sat across from me and explained that it would be healthier if Mason and I separated immediately. She insisted children deserved stability and claimed I should leave so Mason could rebuild his life. When I quietly asked where she expected me to go with 2 infants less than 2 weeks old, she simply shrugged and suggested I would figure something out because I always had. Her complete lack of compassion shocked me far more than her words. I turned toward Mason, hoping he would finally defend me, or at least speak on behalf of his own children. Instead, he remained silent with his arms folded across his chest. His refusal to say anything answered every question I still carried in my heart. Several hours later I came downstairs after feeding the twins and found Evelyn standing beside the front door holding my coat, my hospital bag, and several baby blankets she had packed without asking. She ordered me to leave immediately so she and Mason could discuss practical matters. I refused. Seconds later she shouted for me to take my babies and get out while Mason silently opened the front door himself. The freezing air stole my breath the moment I stepped outside. Snow covered my boots before I reached the driveway, and both babies cried as the wind wrapped around us. My body was still recovering from childbirth, and every step hurt, yet somehow I kept walking. Then I remembered something neither Mason nor his mother knew. I was not helpless. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and called the private transportation service my company kept available for executives traveling after late client meetings. Within minutes a black SUV stopped in front of the house. My assistant, Olivia, had already reserved a luxury hotel suite and arranged everything the twins would need before we even arrived. Wrapped in a warm robe while Noah and Lily finally slept peacefully, I stopped hiding the truth. My first call was to my attorney. I explained every detail, including the affair, the eviction, and the fact that I had personally funded most of our home. She calmly reminded me that every financial transfer had been documented for years. The house belonged to both of us legally, but my ownership interest was substantially larger because of my contributions. She assured me that forcing a recovering mother and newborn children out into dangerous winter conditions would look very different inside a courtroom than it had inside Evelyn's living room. My next call went to the communications director at my company. For years the public had known our award-winning design firm without realizing I was its founder and creative leader. I finally authorized her to reveal my identity. Within days business publications featured my story, focusing on the successful entrepreneur who had quietly built a respected company before being thrown out of her own home with newborn twins. The articles never mentioned Mason by name, but people within our community quickly connected the pieces. Suddenly the quiet woman everyone underestimated became impossible to ignore. The legal process moved faster than Mason expected. Emergency hearings granted me immediate possession of the house because the court recognized that removing infants from their residence without a safe plan placed them at unnecessary risk. Financial records also exposed months of unexplained spending connected to Vanessa, proving the affair had lasted throughout much of my pregnancy. Every attempt Mason made to defend his actions collapsed under documented evidence. Meanwhile, Evelyn discovered something she never expected. Her struggling hotel business had recently signed renovation agreements with my company through one of her managers. Because of the ongoing litigation and contractual ethics provisions, those projects were legally canceled. She lost the opportunity that might have saved her failing business. None of those victories erased the pain. There were countless nights when both babies cried at once while legal paperwork covered my dining table. Some relatives accused me of humiliating Mason publicly, even though I had spent years protecting his reputation. Others insisted I should forgive everything for the sake of family. They never stood outside in that snow holding to newborn children while someone locked the door behind them. Forgiveness is personal, but accountability matters too. Several months later, the divorce became final. I received primary custody because I had always been the children's primary caregiver, while Mason gradually earned scheduled visitation after completing parenting requirements ordered by the court. I eventually moved back into the same house where everything had fallen apart. Standing in the driveway with Noah sleeping against my shoulder and Lily smiling from her stroller, I realized that the place where I had experienced my greatest humiliation had also become the place where I reclaimed my life. Mason contacted me once afterward, saying he never imagined everything would end this way. He asked why I had never told him the full truth about my success from the beginning. I answered honestly. I had shown him exactly who I was from the day we met. He simply chose to measure my worth by what he assumed I lacked instead of appreciating the woman standing beside him. That misunderstanding belonged to him, not me. Today my company continues to grow. My children fill our home with laughter, and the sunroom where I once worked alone has become a thriving creative studio. Every time I watch Noah quietly studying the world or hear Lily confidently announcing her latest opinion, I remember the night we stood together in the snow. Mason and Evelyn believed they were throwing away someone with nothing left. Instead, they unknowingly pushed me toward the strongest chapter of my life. Sometimes the people who underestimate your value become the very reason you finally stop hiding it.